the most disturbing true crime stories.
Into the abyss of true crime, there exists a corner of reality so dark, so gruesome, that even the bravest minds flinch at the mere whisper of its truths. These are not fictional horrors spun from the imagination of a novelist or screenwriter. These are the echoes of real screams, the haunting footprints of real monster human beings whose actions defy understanding, morality, and sometimes even sanity. There's something chillingly magnetic about diving into the minds of killers, manipulators, and criminals who operate in the darkest fringes of society. We search for answers. What makes someone cross that line? How could these atrocities happen in real life? Are monsters born, or are they made? In seeking answers, we are pulled deeper into stories that test our very concept of humanity. The most disturbing true crime stories is not your typical true crime collection. This video isn't about notorious heists or criminal masterminds who outwitted the system. It's about the vile, the unimaginable, and the tragically real. It's about cases that push the limits of human cruelty and expose the raw and horrific capabilities of those who walk among us. Each episode in this video is a descent into a different realm of horrorsome from the distant past. Others, uncomfortably recent. Some stories involve psychological torment. Others are graphic beyond belief. But all are real. The purpose of this video is not to sensationalize tragedy, but to present the disturbing truths with honesty, depth, and historical accuracy. These are cautionary tales, psychological studies, and historical records all rolled into one. You'll meet people like Junko Furuta, a 17-year-old girl whose ordeal is so harrowing it is often dismissed as urban legend, but it is heartbreakingly true. You'll read about Albert Fish, the elderly cannibal who wrote letters to his victims' families, and the Toolbox Killer, who turned a trailer into a chamber of horrors. You'll come face to face with the cruel minds of the Moors murderers, and the ritualistic slaughter committed by the Chicago Ripper crew. Each case is told with careful attention to facts, with the utmost respect to victims and survivors, and with a focus on the social, psychological, and cultural impact of these crimes. The crimes chronicled are disturbing, sometimes beyond belief, but they are also essential for understanding the depths of human behavior, the failures of justice systems, and the resilience of survivors. Prepare yourself to confront the uncomfortable, to question the boundaries of evil, and to explore stories that will linger in your mind long after the final page. This is not fiction. These are the most disturbing true crime stories. The Toolbox Killers, sadism on wheels. In the summer of 1979, a series of disappearances in Southern California left families devastated and police searching for answers. It wasn't until later that authorities discovered the shocking truth behind the vanishing of 5 teenage girls. The perpetrators, known today as the Toolbox Killers, were 2 men whose names are forever associated with one of the most disturbing cases in modern American criminal history. This is the story of Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, and how their seemingly normal lives hid one of the darkest conspiracies of cruelty ever uncovered. A deadly connection. Bittaker and Norris met in 1977 while serving time at California Men's Colony, a state prison. Despite their differences, Bittaker was highly intelligent and outwardly calm, while Norris had a history of violence and instability. They found common ground and shared dark fantasies. What started as conversation quickly turned into a dangerous partnership. After being released from prison within months of each other in 1979, the 2 men reunited and began planning what they referred to as a project. Their goal was to kidnap and harm teenage girls, using a specially modified van that allowed them to remain mobile and undetected. The disappearances between June and October of 1979, 5 teenage girls disappeared under suspicious circumstances. 1. Lucinda Schaefer, 16. 2. Andrea Hall, 18. 3. Jackie Gilliam, 15. 4. Leah Lamp, 13. 5. Shirley Ledford, 16. Each girl was last seen walking alone, either hitchhiking or returning home from school or work. In most cases, there were no immediate witnesses, and evidence was limited. The connection between the victims wouldn't be discovered until months later, when the truth behind their disappearances was finally revealed. The van of secrets Bittaker had purchased a silver GMC van and removed the back seats to create space in the rear. This van, which they referred to as Murder Mac, became central to their crimes. They drove around Southern California, looking for potential victims. When they found someone vulnerable, they would lure them into the vehicle by offering a ride. Once inside, the van's doors were locked, the windows were covered, and escape was nearly impossible. The mobile nature of their plan allowed them to operate for months without drawing suspicion. The break in the case. The investigation took a major turn when Roy Norris was arrested for an unrelated offense. During questioning, he confessed to the earlier crimes and implicated Bittaker. He also provided information about the locations of the victims and the methods they used. Authorities searched Bittaker's home and the van, uncovering evidence that linked both men to the disappearances. Items found included photographs and recordings that investigators later described as deeply disturbing. The trial and public reaction. Roy Norris agreed to testify against Bittaker in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to 45 years to life in prison. Bittaker, on the other hand, was convicted on multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and assault, and received the death penalty in 1981. He remained on death row until his death in 2019. The case drew national media attention due to the calculated nature of the crimes and the disturbing dynamic between the two men. It also raised serious questions about the effectiveness of the parole system and the challenges of identifying and stopping offenders before they act again. Psychological impact. Criminal psychologists have studied the Bittaker and Norris case extensively, especially because they operated as a pair. While most serial crimes are committed by individuals, this case revealed how dangerous two people can become when their darkest instincts align. The two seemed to feed off each other's lack of empathy, and their actions escalated with each new victim. The case is often used in criminal justice education as a key example of team-based criminal behavior, planning, and predatory targeting. Remembering the victims, at the center of this tragedy are the young girls whose lives were stolen far too soon. Each victim had dreams, goals, and loved ones left behind. Their names are still remembered today, and their families continue to honor their memories through advocacy, education, and awareness campaigns. Legacy of the case. The Toolbox Killers case remains one of the most chilling in American criminal history, not just for the crimes themselves, but for how methodically they were planned and executed. It serves as a stark reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, and that ordinary appearances can sometimes mask the most dangerous intentions. Thanks to diligent investigative work and the courage of those who spoke out, the truth was brought to light. Justice, though never complete, was served. If you or someone you know ever finds themselves in danger or witnesses suspicious behavior, speak up. Trust your instincts. Early action can save lives. The murder of Junko Furuta, 44 Days of Hell. In the late 1980s, Japan witnessed one of the most heartbreaking and disturbing criminal cases in its history. It involved a young high school student named Junko Furuta, who was abducted and subjected to a prolonged ordeal that tragically ended in her death. Her story has since become a symbol of the dangers of unchecked violence, peer pressure, and the failure of bystanders to act. A life full of promise, Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old student living in Misato, in Japan's Saitama Prefecture. Described by those who knew her as intelligent, well-mannered, and dedicated to her studies, Junko was the type of student who didn't drink, smoke, or cause trouble. She had recently secured a part-time job and was looking forward to her future after graduation. Her life, full of promise, was tragically cut short after a chance encounter with a group of boys from her neighborhood, of whom had prior connections to organized crime. The abduction. On November 25, 1988, while returning home from work, Junko was approached by a boy she knew, Hiroshi Miyano, who had shown interest in her. When she politely declined his advances, he and his friends decided to retaliate. They lured her away under false pretenses and brought her to a house where they had full access and privacy. She was held there against her will for an extended period, 44 days, during which she endured an experience no human being should ever have to face. The tragic ordeal. What Junko went through during those 44 days was never supposed to happen, not to her. not to anyone. While it's important to respect her memory and tell the truth, we must also be mindful of how we talk about her story. During her captivity, Junko was subjected to emotional, physical, and psychological abuse. She was isolated from the outside world and denied contact with her family. Multiple people were aware that she was being held, but no one came forward to help, whether due to fear, apathy, or a misplaced sense of loyalty. Her condition deteriorated rapidly over time. She remained strong for as long as she could, but the abuse took a heavy toll on her health and spirit. Despite her strength and courage, she ultimately succumbed to her injuries on January 4, 1989. Justice and controversy. When her body was discovered, concealed in a container, authorities were deeply disturbed. The investigation led to the arrest of 4 teenage boys, all under the age of 20. Despite the seriousness of the crime, the sentences they received were widely viewed as shockingly lenient due to their ages. The public outcry was immense. Media outlets, advocacy groups, and ordinary citizens across Japan demanded justice for Junko and reform of juvenile laws that allowed such severe crimes to go unpunished in proportion to their impact. Although the real names of the perpetrators were initially withheld by law, they were later revealed by journalists and activists who believed the nature of the crime warranted full accountability. Remembering Junko, in the wake of her death, Junko's school held a graduation ceremony where her diploma was posthumously presented to her parents. Her classmates left her chair empty, a quiet but powerful tribute to the life that had been stolen. Over the years, Junko Furuta has become a symbol not only of the horrifying nature of the crime, but of the importance of speaking out, protecting the vulnerable, and holding people accountable, regardless of age or influence. Her story has been used in educational contexts across Japan and beyond, as a cautionary tale and a reminder of the importance of intervention when something doesn't feel right. It also opened conversations around the roles of bystanders, law enforcement, and community responsibility. The Moors murders. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. In 1960s England, a quiet region near Manchester became the backdrop to one of the most haunting true crime cases in British history, known as the Moors murders. This case involved the couple Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, who committed a series of killings that shocked the nation and left a permanent scar on the country's collective memory. The crimes weren't just brutal, they were calculated, deliberate, and carried out by individuals who, from the outside, appeared to be an ordinary couple. A disturbing partnership, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley met while working together at a chemical distribution company in Manchester in the early 1960s. Brady was intelligent, but deeply influenced by violent literature and extremist ideologies. Hindley, initially quiet and conservative, became infatuated with him. Under his influence, she began to adopt his worldview, eventually becoming a willing accomplice in his dark plans. What started as a twisted romance evolved into a partnership that would lure innocent children and teenagers into irreversible danger. The crimes, between 1963 and 1965, the pair were responsible for the deaths of 5 young victims, all between the ages of 10 and 17. The crimes were premeditated and methodically carried out. The couple often posed as a friendly pair offering help or requesting assistance. Once the victim was isolated, they were taken to a secure location. The victims were later buried on Saddleworth Moor, a remote and desolate area near Manchester. It was this detail that gave the case its now infamous name. The victims. The names of the victims are remembered in the UK to this day. 1. Pauline Reed, 16. 2. John Kilbride, 12. 3. Keith Bennett, 12. His remains have still never been found. 4. Leslie Ann Downey, 10. 5. Edward Evans, 17. These young individuals were full of potential and innocence, taken far too soon by a pair who exploited their trust. How the case unfolded. The turning point in the investigation came with the murder of Edward Evans. Brady had invited him to his home, where Hindley's brother-in-law, David Smith, was present. During the encounter, Smith witnessed a violent act and fled the scene, later reporting what he had seen to police. His cooperation led to a search of the couple's home, which revealed photographs, tapes, and written material that connected Brady and Hindley to the previous disappearances. Most chillingly, a photo of Hindley posing on Saddleworth Moor eventually helped police locate the burial sites of several victims. Trial and sentencing. The trial took place in 1966, and both Brady and Hindley were found guilty. Due to the nature of the crimes, they were sentenced to life imprisonment. Brady remained in prison until his death in 2017. Hindley, who later claimed she had been manipulated by Brady, was denied parole multiple times and died in custody in 2002. The trial gripped the UK, not only because of the severity of the crimes, but also due to the public shock over a woman's involvement in such acts. At the time, it was nearly unthinkable. The lasting impact. The Moors murders had a profound effect on the UK. Public awareness. The case led to greater caution among families and communities, with stronger public awareness about child safety and stranger danger. Media ethics. The intense media coverage raised questions about how crime is reported, particularly regarding the privacy of victims' families and the ethical portrayal of offenders. Criminal psychology. The partnership between Brady and Hindley became a significant case study in criminology and psychology, especially in understanding how influence, manipulation, and shared ideologies can fuel violent behavior. Ongoing search for Keith Bennett. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the case is the unresolved fate of 12-year-old Keith Bennett. Despite multiple searches over the decades, his body has never been found. His mother, Winnie Johnson, campaigned tirelessly until her death, pleading with authorities and even Brady himself for answers that never came. Lessons from the case. The Moors murders case teaches us that evil can sometimes take on a familiar, even ordinary appearance. Brady and Hindley lived in a regular neighborhood, had steady jobs, and presented themselves as just another couple, but behind closed doors, they were planning and committing acts that would devastate families and horrify the nation. This case also demonstrates the importance of listening to witnesses, acting on suspicions, and understanding how psychological manipulation can lead individuals down dangerous paths. Remembering the victims above all, we must remember the young lives lost. Pauline, John, Keith, Leslie Ann, and Edward. Their stories are more than tragic headlines. They were real children with futures, families, and dreams. Their memories continue to be honored by their loved ones in the public, who ensure their names are never forgotten. The Moors murders remain one of the most devastating cases in UK history. It forced the nation to confront the darkness that can exist behind seemingly normal facades, and prompted lasting changes in how society addresses violent crime, justice, and mental health. By telling this story carefully and respectfully, we ensure that these lessons and the lives affected are never lost to time. The Toolbox Killer, David Parker Ray's torture chamber. In the remote town of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, a shocking case unraveled at the turn of the 21st century. A man who seemed quiet, almost unremarkable, was revealed to be one of the most disturbing figures in American criminal history. Known as the Toolbox Killer, David Parker Ray constructed a hidden room filled with specially designed tools, used not for industrial work but for something far more sinister. His case remains one of the most complex and disturbing ever investigated, not just because of what he did, but because of how meticulously he planned everything and how many questions remain unanswered to this day. Who was David Parker Ray? Born in 1939, David Parker Ray was a former mechanic and maintenance worker with a long history of psychological issues and disturbing fantasies. He served in the U.S. Army and later worked for the local Parks Department. Outwardly, he maintained a relatively low profile, and many neighbors never suspected anything unusual about him. However, behind closed doors, Ray was building something he referred to as his toy box, a soundproof trailer designed to carry out acts of extreme control and manipulation. This wasn't something done impulsively. It was carefully orchestrated over many years. The discovery. In March 1999, everything changed. A woman managed to escape from captivity in Ray's home, and her courageous report to police sparked a massive investigation. Authorities executed a search warrant at Ray's property and discovered the infamous trailer parked behind his residence. What they found was chilling. The trailer was filled with devices and items suggesting long-term planning and preparation. Investigators quickly realized they were not dealing with a single isolated incident, but something far more extensive and deeply disturbing. The toy box. The trailer was a converted utility space, rigged with surveillance equipment, restraints, and other specialized tools. It was designed to make it nearly impossible for anyone inside to communicate with the outside world. What disturbed investigators even more was the presence of video cameras, personal items, and detailed notes. These documents hinted at the possibility that multiple individuals had been brought into the trailer over the years, and that David Parker Ray may have had accomplices. The role of others. Indeed, the investigation revealed that Ray had not acted alone. At least 2 other individuals were identified as collaborators. Cindy Hendy, his girlfriend, who admitted to assisting him and was later convicted. Jessie Ray, his daughter, was also investigated but faced less severe charges. Their involvement raised questions about how something so elaborate could happen for so long without being noticed. The victims. One of the greatest tragedies of the Toolbox Killer case is the uncertainty surrounding the number of victims. While several survivors came forward after the case went public, no confirmed homicides were ever linked directly to Ray. However, law enforcement believes he may have been responsible for many disappearances over the years. Ray himself reportedly claimed to have harmed more than a dozen individuals, but investigators were unable to locate remains or physical evidence to confirm this. He used drugs to sedate victims and allegedly erase their memories, leading some survivors to question whether what they experienced was even real until the trailer proved otherwise. Trial and death. David Parker Ray was arrested in 1999 and charged with multiple counts related to kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy. Just before he was due to begin serving a long prison sentence, he died of a heart attack in 2002, sparing him a full trial and preventing closure for many of his alleged victims. His girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, was sentenced to 36 years in prison after cooperating with authorities. She was released in 2019 after serving roughly half her sentence, which sparked public outrage, lasting questions. Despite the extensive investigation, many questions remain. How many victims were there really? Were there more accomplices? Were the victims primarily local, or did Ray target travelers and those unlikely to be reported missing? Law enforcement searched nearby lakes and properties, but were unable to uncover enough evidence to fully confirm Ray's confessions. The absence of physical remains continues to leave the full extent of his crimes shrouded in mystery. Legacy and impact. The Toolbox Killer case has had a lasting impact on both criminal justice and victim advocacy. Survivor empowerment. The bravery of the woman who escaped helped expose a criminal operation that had likely been ongoing for years. Law enforcement coordination. The case highlighted the importance of interagency cooperation, as multiple departments were needed to search remote areas and examine potential missing persons cases. Trauma awareness. It also brought attention to the psychological manipulation and trauma survivors often endure, and how hard it can be for them to come forward, especially when they've been made to doubt their own memories. David Parker Ray may have taken many secrets to the grave, but his case stands as a reminder of the importance of listening to survivors, trusting instincts, and recognizing that evil doesn't always look obvious. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, well-dressed, polite, and ordinary on the outside. This story is about more than just crime. It's about the strength of those who escaped, the importance of justice, and the pursuit of truth, even when the full answers may never come. The Hello Kitty murder. A nightmare in Hong Kong. In 1999, a shocking case in Hong Kong sent ripples of horror across the globe. It wasn't just the nature of the crime that disturbed the public, it was the surreal and deeply unsettling discovery that followed. A missing woman's remains were found hidden inside a Hello Kitty doll, leading the case to be known worldwide as the Hello Kitty murder. This case wasn't just about a crime. It revealed how power, fear, and silence can combine to create a tragedy that no one saw coming until it was too late. The victim, Fan Man, Yi Fan Man. Yi was a 23-year-old woman who had faced many challenges in her life. Raised in an orphanage after being abandoned as a child, she struggled through poverty and addiction. Despite this, she was making efforts to improve her life, working at a nightclub and caring for her young son. In early 1999, Fan came into contact with a man named Chan Man-lok, a known figure in the criminal underworld. What started as a personal dispute between them would soon escalate into something far more tragic. The disappearance Fan was reported missing in March 1999. Her friends and family were concerned, but in a city as dense and fast-moving as Hong Kong, missing adult cases often go unresolved, at least initially. Months went by with no sign of her, and there were few leads. That changed when a 14-year-old girl approached police with a shocking story. The break in the case. The girl told police that she had been staying in the apartment of Chan Man-lok and witnessed events that disturbed her deeply. Her testimony led police to search the apartment where Fan had last been seen. What they discovered shocked the entire investigative team. Inside the apartment, among the debris and personal belongings, officers found a large Hello Kitty mermaid doll, and inside its hollow interior were human remains. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the remains belonged to Fan Man-yi. It was a case so surreal that headlines around the world picked up on it almost instantly. The contrast between the innocence of a beloved children's toy and the horror of what it contained captured the world's attention. The investigation and trial, 3 individuals were arrested and charged in connection with the crime. Chan Man-lok, the ringleader, Long Vai-lung, Long Xing-cho, all 3 were linked to organized crime activity. During the trial, the court heard testimony about the events that took place in the apartment over a period of weeks. The suspects were accused of holding Fan against her will and abusing her. The most crucial evidence came not just from the forensics, but from the testimony of the teenage girl who had initially come forward. Her courage in speaking out became instrumental in ensuring that justice could be pursued. Sentencing. In 2000, the court convicted all 3 men not of murder, but of manslaughter, due to insufficient evidence proving intent to kill. They were each sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. The verdict sparked debate and criticism from the public, many of whom felt that the charges didn't reflect the severity of the case. Public reaction and media coverage. The case attracted significant media attention, both locally and internationally. The disturbing details, combined with the unique Hello Kitty imagery, caused widespread shock. The juxtaposition of innocence and horror created a lasting psychological impact, especially in Hong Kong. In the aftermath, Hong Kong's citizens began to reflect on deeper issues raised by the case. How can vulnerable individuals be better protected from exploitation? What responsibilities do communities and neighbors have when they sense something is wrong? How do we balance media freedom with ethical reporting on sensitive cases? These conversations brought greater awareness to the rights of victims, youth exploitation, and domestic violence. The lasting impact. Though many years have passed since the Hello Kitty murder, the case remains a haunting example of how violence can exist behind closed doors in even the busiest of cities. It also serves as a powerful reminder that no life is without value, regardless of someone's past or status in society. Fan Man-yi's story is one of a woman who had struggled, but who was trying to move forward. Her life was stolen from her, but her memory continues to be honored by those who believe every person deserves dignity, protection, and justice. Lessons learned. The Hello Kitty case illustrates several important lessons. The importance of speaking out when something feels wrong. The crucial role of community and law enforcement in protecting vulnerable people. The need to examine how justice systems handle cases involving marginalized individuals. Most of all, it reminds us that behind every headline is a real human being with a story worth telling. The Hello Kitty murder remains one of the most unsettling and high-profile cases in Hong Kong's history. But beyond the headlines and shock value lies a deeper story, a warning, a tragedy, and a call to awareness. By remembering the victim and reflecting on the lessons of this case, we honor not just her memory, but the need to protect others from similar fates. Albert Fish, the boogeyman of early America. In the early 20th century, the streets of New York were bustling with change, opportunity, and growth. But beneath the surface of a rapidly modernizing America, a dark figure was making headlines for reasons that would terrify generations to come. His name was Albert Fish, and he would go down in history as one of the most chilling and unsettling criminals the country had ever seen. Often referred to as the boogeyman, Fish's crimes, trial, and mental condition fascinated and horrified the public. His story has become a permanent part of American true crime history. Who was Albert Fish? Albert Fish was born in 1870 in Washington, D.C., into a deeply troubled family. Several members of his family had documented mental health struggles, and from a young age, Fish showed signs of emotional instability. He spent time in orphanages, where he was exposed to harsh treatment that would later influence his behavior and views on pain, punishment, and control. As he grew older, Fish lived a seemingly ordinary life on the surface, working various jobs, marrying, and having children, but in reality, he was hiding a deeply disturbed inner world. A pattern of concern. Throughout the early 1900s, Fish moved around various cities, often changing names and avoiding suspicion. He had numerous run-ins with the law, usually for minor offenses. However, there were growing concerns about his behavior toward children. During this time, he developed a reputation for being unpredictable and was suspected in a series of disturbing incidents. Unfortunately, due to the limitations of early 20th century law enforcement and lack of nationwide databases, many warning signs were overlooked or dismissed. The Grace Budd case. The turning point in Fish's story came in 1928, with the disappearance of a 10-year-old girl named Grace Budd. Fish had posed as a wealthy gentleman offering employment to Grace's older brother. He visited the family, earned their trust, and convinced them to let Grace accompany him to what he claimed would be a party. She was never seen alive again. For several years, the case remained unsolved. Grace's disappearance puzzled police and devastated her family. The case drew public attention and was widely reported in the media. But it wasn't until 1934, when a letter arrived at the Budd family home, that investigators finally had a break: the arrest. The letter, which revealed disturbing information about the crime, was carefully examined by police. They traced it to a rooming house in Manhattan, where Fish had once stayed. Surveillance and investigative work eventually led to his arrest in December 1934. Fish cooperated with police and openly discussed not only the Budd case, but also his troubled life and behaviors. His confessions were chilling not just for their content, but for the calm and emotionless manner in which he described everything. The trial. Albert Fish's trial began in March 1935 and quickly became one of the most sensational court cases of the era. The defense argued that Fish was legally insane, citing his long history of mental illness, his bizarre behavior, and disturbing writings. However, the prosecution argued that despite his mental instability, Fish knew right from wrong and had planned his actions carefully. They presented evidence showing that he had methodically lured victims, used false identities, and taken steps to evade capture. After a lengthy and emotional trial, the jury found Fish guilty. He was sentenced to death and was executed in 1936 at Sing Sing Prison in New York. Psychological profile. Albert Fish's case has long fascinated psychiatrists, criminologists, and psychologists. His actions, combined with his traumatic childhood and personal writings, made him one of the earliest examples of a highly complex criminal mind in American history. Many experts believe Fish suffered from severe psychosis, likely including multiple disorders. Yet his ability to function in society, plan his crimes, and manipulate others showed a disturbing level of control. His case raised questions that are still discussed today. Can someone be mentally ill and still fully responsible for their actions? How should the justice system handle individuals with extreme psychological conditions? What warning signs were missed, and could this have been prevented? Legacy and impact. The Albert Fish case has left a deep imprint on American true crime history for several reasons. Legal history. It highlighted the complexity of criminal responsibility and mental health in court cases. Public awareness. The media coverage of his trial brought national attention to the importance of child safety. Forensic advancements. The investigation showed the early use of forensic handwriting analysis to track down suspects. His case also contributed to early studies in criminal profiling, a practice that would later become standard in law enforcement agencies worldwide. In retrospect, Albert Fish is often referred to in documentaries, books, and true crime discussions, not for shock value, but as a case study in the intersection of trauma, mental illness, and criminal behavior. His crimes remain difficult to discuss, even in general terms, but they serve as an important reminder of the need for mental health awareness, early intervention, and strong systems of protection for vulnerable individuals. Though his crimes occurred nearly a century ago, the legacy of Albert Fish still resonates. His case reminds us of the importance of vigilance, the value of psychological evaluation, and the tragic consequences when disturbed individuals are left untreated and unmonitored. By focusing on the facts and learning from the past, we can work toward a safer and more informed society, one where tragedies like this are far less likely to happen again. The Chicago Ripper Crew, Rituals and Real Fear. In the early 1980s, the city of Chicago was gripped by fear. A series of mysterious disappearances and tragic discoveries sent shockwaves through the community. What investigators would eventually uncover was a criminal group so bizarre and disturbing that the case still remains one of the most unsettling in the history of American crime. This group would come to be known as the Chicago Ripper Crew, a name that, to this day, represents a chilling mix of violence, ritualistic behavior, and psychological manipulation. The men behind the name. The Chicago Ripper Crew consisted of 4 individuals, led by Robin Gecht, a man with a background in construction who had once worked for serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Gecht was intelligent and charismatic, traits he used to manipulate and control others. The group also included 3 followers, Edward Spreitzer and brothers Andrew and Thomas Kokorales. All 3 were younger and, according to many sources, heavily influenced by Gecht's personality and disturbing ideology. Together, they formed a group that engaged in a series of crimes over a period of several months in 1981 and 1982. These crimes targeted vulnerable women and left the city in a state of panic. A string of disappearances. The group's activities involved driving around in a van, searching for women who were alone. Victims were taken to a secluded location where they were held against their will. These incidents were marked by what police described as a pattern of ritualistic behavior, though the exact details were not released to the public in full due to their disturbing nature. What investigators did share is that the crew believed they were carrying out acts tied to occult symbolism and strange personal beliefs, likely influenced by Gecht's distorted views and writings. At least 18 women were believed to be connected to the case, though not all could be conclusively linked to the group due to a lack of evidence. The turning point. The crew was eventually brought down, not through direct confrontation, but through survivor testimony. One woman, who had managed to escape their captivity bravely, came forward and provided police with critical information. Her survival and willingness to speak out was instrumental in cracking the case. With this testimony, police were able to trace the crimes back to Gecht and his group. When brought in for questioning, some members of the crew cooperated, while others remained silent. As the investigation unfolded, the disturbing nature of their actions became increasingly clear. The trials and sentencing. Edward Spreitzer was sentenced to death, which was later commuted to life imprisonment. Andrew Kokorales was executed in 1999, making him the last person executed in Illinois before the state abolished the death penalty. Thomas Kokorales was eventually released in 2019 after serving decades in prison, a move that sparked public outrage. Robin Gecht, the group's alleged leader, was never convicted of murder, but is serving a long sentence for related charges. Many believe he was the mastermind behind the group's ideology and influence. The legal proceedings were long and complex, partly due to the psychological evaluations required in the multiple jurisdictions involved in the crimes. Media and public reaction. At the time, the Chicago Ripper Crew case gained national media attention. The idea of a group committing such acts as part of a ritualistic belief system was shocking to the public. Rumors spread, sometimes blurring fact and fiction, and the case became a source of urban legends in Chicago and beyond. However, investigators and reporters worked to separate exaggeration from truth. What remained clear was this: a group of men, under the influence of dangerous ideas and groupthink, had committed very real and serious crimes. The psychology of group crime. What makes this case especially significant is the group dynamic. Most violent crimes are committed by individuals, but in the case of the Chicago Ripper crew, it was the shared beliefs and reinforcement between members that helped escalate their behavior. Criminologists have studied the case as an example of group coercion and peer pressure in criminal behavior, psychological control by a charismatic leader, the dangers of ideological radicalization, even outside of political or religious extremism. This case also emphasizes the importance of recognizing early warning signs, including manipulation, obsession with control, and detachment from reality. The role of the survivor. Perhaps the most powerful part of this story is the courage shown by the survivor, who escaped and testified. Her bravery not only stopped the group, but also gave closure to the families of several victims. Her actions led to significant legal consequences and reminded the world of the strength it takes to speak out, especially when facing fear, trauma, and disbelief. Legacy and reflection. The Chicago Ripper crew case remains one of the most infamous examples of group-based violent crime in U.S. history. It shows that under the wrong influence, even those who might not act alone can be led down a path of destruction. For many in Chicago, the case left a lingering fear but also a stronger sense of community awareness, better investigative practices, and a commitment to victim advocacy. The Chicago Ripper crew was a rare and chilling example of coordinated violence fueled by ideology and manipulation. Though justice was served in various degrees, the lessons learned from the case continue to guide modern criminal investigations and reinforce the need to stay vigilant against dangerous group dynamics. By telling this story responsibly, we remember the victims, honor the courage of survivors, and reaffirm the importance of justice, truth, and collective safety. The Vampire of Sacramento, Richard Chase. In the late 1970s, a quiet neighborhood in Sacramento, California, became the center of one of the most terrifying and tragic true crime cases in U.S. history. A man named Richard Chase would later be known as the Vampire of Sacramento, due to the strange and disturbing beliefs that fueled his crimes. His case is not only disturbing because of what happened, but also because it reveals the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness and how deeply someone can become detached from reality. Who was Richard Chase? Richard Trenton Chase was born in 1950 in California. From a young age, he exhibited signs of severe behavioral and emotional issues. He struggled in school, had difficulty forming relationships, and experienced frequent outbursts of aggression. As he got older, these issues intensified, particularly after drug use and isolation in his teenage years. By his early 20s, Chase was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a serious mental disorder characterized by delusions, hallucinations, and distorted thinking. He became convinced that people were out to harm him and believed his body was failing in strange and impossible ways. Instead of receiving long-term care and supervision, Chase eventually slipped through the cracks of the mental health system. Delusions and mental decline. One of the most disturbing elements of Chase's case was his belief that his blood was turning to powder and that his organs were shrinking or disappearing. He believed the only way to survive was to replenish himself, leading to increasingly erratic and dangerous behavior. His actions were not driven by malice in the traditional sense, but by deep psychosis. He didn't view his victims as people, but as part of a delusional survival process. This made him unpredictable and extremely dangerous. The crimes. In the span of 1 month, in 1978, Chase committed a series of violent crimes that shocked the Sacramento community. Each incident involved a different household and happened with no clear pattern, making it extremely difficult for law enforcement to track or anticipate his next move. What made the case especially terrifying was how random and spontaneous the attacks were. Chase did not target specific individuals. She chose homes that were unlocked or appeared vulnerable. This created widespread fear, as it seemed anyone could become a target. The investigation. After the final incident, a tip from a community member led police to Chase's apartment. When officers arrived, they were shocked by the state of his home. There were clear signs that he had been deeply immersed in his delusions, with evidence of strange behavior and writings found throughout the residence. Forensic evidence, including fingerprints and ballistics, connected him to the scenes of the crimes. Chase was arrested without resistance and taken into custody. The trial, Richard Chase's trial, began in 1979. His defense team argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. However, the court found that he understood the consequences of his actions enough to be held responsible. He was found guilty of multiple counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. In 1980, before his execution could take place, Chase was found dead in his cell due to an apparent suicide. Mental health and public safety. The case of Richard Chase has become a key example in discussions about the importance of mental health intervention, the risks of untreated psychosis, the role of the criminal justice system in handling individuals with severe psychiatric conditions. Chase had previously been institutionalized, but was released after a short period despite serious warning signs. This raised major concerns about how mental illness is handled when it intersects with potential violence. Today, his case is still used in criminology and forensic psychology courses to demonstrate the need for better systems to identify, monitor, and treat those experiencing dangerous delusions. Community impact. The suddenness and randomness of Chase's crimes left an entire community on edge. Many residents began locking their doors for the first time. Parents kept children closer, and neighbors became more alert to unusual behavior. The emotional scars lingered for years, and the case remains one of the most terrifying chapters in Sacramento's history. Despite the horror, it also led to greater awareness about mental health, encouraging more proactive approaches in identifying at-risk individuals. Legacy and lessons. Richard Chase's story is not only about crime, it's about the consequences of untreated mental illness, the failures in public health systems, and the deep need for support, supervision, and compassion for those living with severe psychological conditions. His case highlights how mental illness, when ignored or mishandled, can have catastrophic outcomes. It reminds us that prevention, early intervention, and ongoing care are essential not just for the individuals affected, but for public safety. The Vampire of Sacramento left behind a legacy of fear, tragedy, and reflection. It's a case that challenges us to think about how society treats mental illness and how crucial it is to listen to early warning signs. By sharing this story responsibly, we aim to raise awareness, promote better mental health support, and ensure that such tragedies are prevented in the future through compassion, action, and informed care. The Monster of the Andes, Pedro Lopez. In the shadowed regions of the Andes Mountains, a case emerged that would shake Latin America and the world. It involved a man named Pedro Alonso Lopez, who would later be known as the Monster of the Andes. His story is not only chilling due to the scale of his crimes, but also because of the controversy surrounding his arrest, sentencing, and eventual release. Pedro Lopez is often cited as one of the most prolific serial offenders in history, but his case remains shrouded in uncertainty, legal complexity, and lingering questions about justice and accountability. A troubled beginning, Pedro Lopez was born in 1948 in Colombia. His early life was marked by extreme poverty, neglect, and trauma. He reportedly left home at a young age and spent his youth on the streets, where he experienced abuse and violence. These formative years were critical in shaping his later behavior. Experts in criminal psychology often point to Lopez's childhood as an example of how early exposure to trauma can influence future actions, particularly in individuals predisposed to psychological disorders. A cross-border threat, Lopez's crimes were not confined to one country. In the 1970s and early 1980s, he moved across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, often targeting areas with limited law enforcement resources and high poverty rates. His victims were often young individuals from vulnerable communities, many of whom were never officially reported missing. In interviews and confessions, Lopez claimed responsibility for over 300 deaths, a number that would make him one of the most lethal individuals ever recorded. However, due to the conditions in rural South America at the time, official documentation was inconsistent, and many cases remained unsolved. The investigation and arrest Lopez was eventually arrested in Ecuador in 1980 after a failed attempt to abduct a child in a public market. Once in custody, he confessed to hundreds of crimes, even leading authorities to several grave sites in remote areas. His detailed knowledge of the locations and of the missing persons convinced investigators that his claims were not fabricated. Ecuadorian police were stunned by the scale of the crimes. Although not all of Lopez's claims could be verified, authorities did link him to dozens of known disappearances. The trial and sentencing. Pedro Lopez was convicted in Ecuador in 1983. But due to limitations in the country's legal system at the time, the maximum sentence for murder was 16 years, regardless of the number of victims. This sentencing shocked the public and international observers, especially given the confessed number of crimes. Lopez served just 14 years in prison before being released in 1994 for good behavior. After his release in Ecuador, he was deported to Colombia, where he was briefly detained in a psychiatric facility, but was later declared fit for release. Disappearance and controversy. Following his release from psychiatric care in Colombia, Pedro Lopez vanished from public records. His whereabouts remain unknown, and to this day, he is considered a fugitive in some jurisdictions. This has raised significant controversy and concern. Many believe that he should have been subject to longer-term incarceration or better post-release monitoring. Interpol even issued a warrant for his rearrest, but Lopez has remained elusive. The fact that someone who admitted to such large-scale crimes could walk free continues to be a global point of concern in discussions about international criminal justice systems. Psychological profile criminal profilers and psychologists have studied Lopez's case in depth. He exhibited signs of severe psychopathy and displayed no remorse during interviews. He saw his crimes as justified and even rationalized them with disturbing beliefs about society. His ability to move between countries and avoid detection for years also shows how systemic gaps in international law enforcement can allow dangerous individuals to evade accountability. Lessons and impact. Pedro Lopez's case left a deep impact on how multiple nations approach missing persons investigations, cross-border criminal activity, sentencing laws in cases involving serial offenses, mental health evaluations in the justice system. It also prompted greater cooperation between Latin American countries in criminal investigations and helped highlight the need for improved protection for vulnerable children and at-risk communities. Remembering the victims while Lopez's name gained notoriety, it's the hundreds of young lives lost that truly define this case. Most of the victims came from impoverished areas and were rarely reported in national news. Many families never received answers or closure. Advocates have since worked to bring more attention to missing children in rural areas, encouraging better reporting systems and public awareness. Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes, a name etched in true crime history, not just for the scale of his confessed actions, but for the difficult questions his story raises. How can systems fail so catastrophically? What protections are in place today that didn't exist then? And how can society ensure justice is served no matter where or when a crime occurs? By reflecting on this case through a factual and respectful lens, we remember the victims, examine the failures, and recommit to a future where such tragedies are far less likely to happen again. The Hinterkaifeck murders, Germany's most chilling cold case. In the quiet Bavarian countryside of Germany, nestled among thick forests and open farmland, stood a small homestead known as Hinterkaifeck. What happened there in 1922 remains one of the most baffling and eerie unsolved murder cases in European history. 6 people, including 2 children, were found dead on the property, their lives taken under deeply mysterious and disturbing circumstances. To this day, the Hinterkaifeck murders continue to fuel speculation, theories, and interest among historians, criminologists, and true crime enthusiasts alike. The setting. A remote farmstead Hinterkaifeck was located about 70 kilometers north of Munich, near the towns of Grobern and Kaifeck. The farm was home to the Gruber family. Andreas Gruber, 63. Casilia Gruber, 72. Their daughter, Victoria Gabriel. Victoria's children, Casilia, 7, and Joseph. Their maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had just arrived on the day of the murders. The Gruber family lived a relatively isolated life. Neighbors occasionally noted odd behavior or complaints about strange occurrences on the property, but nothing ever seemed serious until it was too late. The discovery. On April 4, 1922, neighbors noticed that no one had been seen at the farm for several days. Mail had piled up, and the family hadn't shown up for church. A group of concerned villagers visited the property and made a chilling discovery. Several members of the household had been killed and partially covered in the barn, while others were found inside the house. Authorities were called, and soon, a murder investigation began that would leave more questions than answers. The clues and mysteries. From the very beginning, investigators were puzzled by several bizarre details surrounding the case. Strange footprints in the snow had been seen leading toward the house, but not away from it. The family dog was found alive, but distressed. Food had been recently eaten, and the cattle had been fed, suggesting the killer may have stayed at the house for several days after the murders. A set of house keys went missing before the incident. The previous maid had quit shortly before the attack, claiming the house was haunted. Despite interviewing over 100 suspects, including local townspeople, soldiers, and even people with criminal records, police were never able to find definitive evidence pointing to a single culprit. Theories. Over the years, many theories have emerged regarding the motive and identity of the killer. Some of the most widely discussed include 1. Family dispute or jealousy. There were rumors of strained relationships within the Gruber family, particularly surrounding the paternity of young Josef. Some believed a family member or someone close to them may have acted out of revenge or anger. 2. A disgruntled stranger. Some believe the killer may have been a traveler or vagrant who found shelter in the isolated home and decided to strike. However, this theory doesn't explain the familiarity the killer appeared to have with the house and routine. 3. A neighbor or acquaintance. Due to the remote location and the presence of strange footprints, some investigators believe the killer may have been someone from the local area who knew the family well and used that knowledge to commit the crime unnoticed. Despite these theories, no conclusive evidence has ever been found. Why it remains unsolved. Several factors contributed to the case going cold. Limited forensic technology in 1922. Contamination of the crime scene by villagers and investigators. The destruction of the farmhouse soon after the murders, which eliminated potential long-term evidence. The death of original investigators before DNA or modern forensics could be applied. Even in modern times, efforts to reopen or re-examine the case have led nowhere definitive. Some amateur detectives and historians continue to study it, but the truth has never fully emerged. Cultural impact. The Hinterkaifeck case has inspired books, documentaries, and even fictional adaptations. Its blend of isolation, mystery, and unresolved tragedy has made it one of Germany's most famous cold cases. The story is often used to explore the limits of early 20th century crime solving, the nature of small-town secrets, and the human desire to find answer 7 when none seem possible. Remembering the victims. While the mystery is what keeps people interested in the case, it's important to remember the victims. Andreas, Kazilia, Victoria, young Kazilia, Josef, and Maria, whose lives were taken in an act of violence that shocked their community. Today, a simple memorial stands near the site of the old farmhouse, serving as a quiet tribute to the lives lost and the questions left unanswered. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of history's most chilling unsolved crimes. A family was wiped out in their own home, and despite over a century of speculation, no one has ever been held accountable. The case challenges us to reflect on how far criminal investigation has come and how sometimes even the most thorough efforts can still leave behind a mystery. In the end, the Hinterkaifeck case reminds us that not every question has an answer, and not every story has a conclusion. The Girl in the Box. Colleen Stan's 7-year captivity. Few true crime stories are as haunting and as inspiring as that of Colleen Stan, a woman who survived an ordeal that lasted over 7 years. Her case, which later became known as the Girl in the Box, is one of the most extraordinary examples of endurance, psychological control, and eventual escape. Her story is not just one of survival, it's a case study in coercive control, the power of the human spirit, and the critical role of awareness and intervention in preventing long-term abuse. A promising young woman. In 1977, Colleen Stan was 20 years old. She lived in Eugene, Oregon, and was, by all accounts, adventurous, independent, and full of life. One spring afternoon, she decided to hitchhike to a friend's birthday party in Northern California, a common and generally accepted practice at the time. She had declined several ride offers before accepting one from a seemingly kind couple traveling with their baby. They appeared friendly and safe, and Colleen had a good feeling about them. That decision would change her life forever. A sudden shift. The couple, Cameron and Janice Hooker, seemed harmless at first, but shortly after picking her up, Cameron took a route off the main highway and pulled the car over. What happened next marked the beginning of Colleen's long and terrifying captivity. She was taken to the Hooker's home in Red Bluff, California, where she would remain for the next 7 years, held under a strict regime of physical control and psychological manipulation. What makes this case especially unique and difficult to understand is how Cameron Hooker created a false narrative that convinced Colleen she was being watched by a powerful and dangerous organization that would harm her or her family if she tried to escape. Life in captivity. During her early years of captivity, Colleen was confined to a small, coffin-sized box, sometimes for up to 23 hours a day. She was only allowed out for brief periods and was made to follow strict rules. Cameron manipulated her into signing a fake contract, making her believe she had no legal rights and was the property of this fictional group he called the Company, overcame. Colleen was allowed limited freedoms, such as helping with chores or caring for the couple's children, but the psychological control remained so strong that even when she had opportunities to leave, she felt too afraid to do so. Janice Hooker's role. Janice Hooker, Cameron's wife, played a complex role in the situation. Initially complicit, she later began to feel remorseful. Over time, she formed a relationship of sorts with Colleen, and eventually, her guilt led her to take action. In 1984, Janice told Colleen that the Company was not real, and that she would not be harmed if she left. This revelation shattered the illusion that had kept Colleen in captivity for so long. With Janice's help, Colleen returned to her family 7 years after she had vanished. Legal action and trial. After Colleen escaped, Janice went to the police and reported everything. Her testimony, combined with Colleen's, was crucial in building the case against Cameron Hooker. In 1985, Hooker was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including kidnapping and assault. During the trial, the court heard about the extreme psychological manipulation used to control Colleen and how fear had kept her from escaping even when given chances. Cameron Hooker was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 104 years in prison. He has since been denied parole multiple times. Colleen's strength and recovery. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of this case is Colleen Stan herself. After escaping, she focused on rebuilding her life. She went on to work, study, and advocate for victims of coercive control and abuse. Over the years, she has shared her story to help others understand the complex realities of psychological manipulation and survival. Colleen's experience has been studied by psychologists, used in law enforcement training, and featured in documentaries and books not for sensationalism, but as a powerful example of how the mind can be controlled and how courage can prevail even in the darkest circumstances. Understanding coercive control. Colleen's story helped raise awareness about a form of abuse not always visible from the outside. Coercive control. This is when someone uses fear, manipulation, isolation, and lies to dominate another person over time. It taught the world that physical barriers are not the only ones that keep people trapped, and that those suffering in silence may not always be able to ask for help, even if it seems like they could. Today, coercive control is recognized in many countries as a form of domestic abuse. Laws and policies have evolved to include psychological abuse in definitions of criminal behavior. The Girl in the Box case is a story of survival, not just victimhood. It's a story that reminds us of how powerful the human spirit can be even in the most extreme circumstances. Colleen Stan is not defined by what was done to her, but by her resilience, bravery, and commitment to helping others through her story. By sharing her experience respectfully and accurately, we bring attention to the hidden forms of abuse that still exist today and help create a world where no one feels trapped or alone. The cannibal couple of Russia, Dmitry and Natalia Baksheva. In 2017, a bizarre and disturbing case from Krasnodar, Russia, stunned the world. A married couple, Dmitry and Natalia Baksheva, were arrested after authorities uncovered evidence suggesting they may have been involved in crimes that included disappearance, deception, and possible acts of cannibalism. The story quickly made headlines across the globe, not only because of its shocking nature, but also because of how the couple's actions went unnoticed for years. To this day, the case remains one of the most unsettling in modern Russian criminal history. A shocking discovery. The case came to light in September 2017, when a construction worker in Krasnodar found a mobile phone that had been left behind on a job site. Curious, he checked the phone for identifying information, but instead found a series of disturbing images. Concerned, he immediately reported the device to local authorities. When police traced the phone back to Dmitry Bakshev, they visited the apartment he shared with his wife, Natalia. What they found raised serious questions. Investigators discovered suspicious items in the couple's residence that suggested criminal activity had taken place. This marked the beginning of an investigation that would reveal layers of disturbing behavior and raise questions about how such acts could occur undetected. Who were Dmitry and Natalia Baksheva? The Bakshevas were not well known in their community. Dmitry, in his mid-30s, and Natalia, nearly 20 years his senior, lived in a dormitory building formerly used by a military school. Neighbors described them as reclusive and occasionally volatile. Natalia, who had once worked in a military kitchen, reportedly held significant influence over Dmitry. Some psychologists later suggested she may have played a dominant role in the relationship, with Dmitry acting under her direction. Despite this, it was clear from the investigation that both individuals shared responsibility in the events that followed. What authorities found? When police searched the Bakshevas' home, they found preserved materials, food items of unknown origin, and photographs that suggested the couple had been documenting their activities. Reports also indicated that digital records showed images dating back as far as 1999, though not all were confirmed or authenticated. It was never fully established how many victims were involved, or whether all claims related to the couple's actions were accurate. Russian authorities conducted forensic testing, but much of the investigation remains classified or incomplete, leaving several unanswered questions. Public reaction and media coverage. Once the case broke, it sparked outrage and fear throughout Russia and internationally. The term cannibal couple spread rapidly in the media, though many outlets were careful to point out that official confirmation of cannibalism was never publicly released by authorities. Still, the case led to widespread discussion on social media, news channels, and in public forums about mental health, law enforcement oversight, and the dangers of isolation in urban settings. Some questioned how the couple could have acted without raising suspicion earlier, especially considering neighbors' later claims of strange odors and behavior over the years. Legal proceedings following the investigation. Dmitry Bakshev was charged with offenses related to homicide and illegal disposal of a body. He later died in custody in 2019 due to reported health complications. Natalia Baksheva was also detained and underwent psychiatric evaluation. According to Russian news sources, she was deemed unfit to stand trial and was committed to a mental health facility for long-term care. Because of the limited information released by authorities and the sensitive nature of the case, many aspects remain unclear to this day. Mental health and psychological analysis. The Baksheva case has since become a topic of interest among criminal psychologists and behavioral experts. It's often cited as an example of how shared delusions, isolation, and mutual reinforcement of extreme beliefs or fantasies can escalate into dangerous behavior. The idea that two individuals, particularly a couple, can act together in the commission of such crimes is rare but not unheard of. In this case, many believe that their codependency and detachment from society played a major role. It also raised important questions about the role of mental health intervention and early warning signs, including social withdrawal, erratic behavior, and unexplained aggression. Lessons and legacy. While the full truth behind the Bakshivas' activities may never be known, the case serves as a powerful reminder of the need for community awareness. Neighbors and local officials must be encouraged to report concerning behavior. Mental health support. Early intervention can help prevent individuals from spiraling into dangerous or unstable behavior. Responsible media coverage. Sensational stories must be reported with care to avoid spreading misinformation or fear. It also demonstrated the value of ordinary citizens taking action after all. It was a construction worker turning in a lost phone that helped bring the case to light. The story of Dmitry and Natalia Bakshiva remains one of the most disturbing and mysterious criminal cases in Russia's recent history. Though justice may have only been partially served, the case underscores the importance of community vigilance, mental health care, and responsible investigation. By focusing on the facts and avoiding speculation, we can honor the seriousness of the case, raise awareness of warning signs, and work toward a society better prepared to intervene before tragedies occur. The slaughterhouse of Jeffrey Dahmer. In the early 1990s, the world learned the name Jeffrey Dahmer, and with it, a dark and deeply disturbing chapter in American criminal history, often referred to by the media as the Milwaukee Cannibal. Dahmer's case is one of the most well-known and unsettling true crime stories ever recorded. What made this case so horrifying wasn't just the nature of the crimes, but the fact that they were committed over more than a decade, largely unnoticed by law enforcement, neighbors, and the community around him. Today, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer is studied not to sensationalize but to understand the psychology of extreme behavior, the failures of the justice system, and the importance of protecting vulnerable populations. Who was Jeffrey Dahmer? Jeffrey Dahmer was born in 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His early life appeared relatively ordinary, but subtle signs of trouble began to emerge as he reached adolescence. He became increasingly withdrawn and isolated, showing little interest in school or social activities. As he got older, Dahmer's behavior grew more erratic. He struggled with substance abuse, emotional disconnection, and obsessive thoughts. Although he attempted to enlist in the military and hold down jobs, his difficulties functioning in normal society became more pronounced. The crimes between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer committed a series of crimes involving young men and teenagers. His method often involved luring individuals back to his apartment with offers of money, photography, or companionship. Many of his victims were from marginalized communities, including people of color and members of the LGBTQ community, something that has led to serious conversations about systemic issues, including racial and social biases that may have prevented earlier intervention. Most of the crimes took place at Dahmer's apartment in Milwaukee, which investigators would later describe as a carefully controlled environment designed to conceal his actions. How he was caught. Dahmer's arrest came on July 22, 1991, when one of his intended victims managed to escape and flag down police officers. When they arrived at Dahmer's residence, they discovered evidence that not only confirmed the survivor's story, but also revealed a larger and more disturbing pattern of crimes. Investigators found materials and items inside the apartment that led them to immediately arrest Dahmer and begin a full-scale investigation. Over time, he confessed to 17 murders, providing detailed information about each case. The trial and sentencing. Jeffrey Dahmer's trial began in January 1992. He pleaded guilty but insane to the charges against him. The trial focused not only on his actions, but on his mental state, raising questions about criminal responsibility and mental illness. After a lengthy legal process, Dahmer was found legally sane and fully responsible. He was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, totaling over 900 years in prison. Dahmer expressed remorse during the trial, but many viewed it as too little, too late, especially for the families of his victims, who were left with unimaginable grief and unanswered questions. Death in custody. Jeffrey Dahmer served time at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. In 1994, he was killed by another inmate while performing work duties inside the prison. His death, while shocking, brought a complex mix of emotions to the public. Some saw it as justice, while others believed even individuals like Dahmer should face life in prison under the law. Psychological analysis. Dahmer's case has been the subject of extensive psychological and criminological analysis. Experts suggest that he exhibited traits of antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and other serious mental health challenges. He also demonstrated a complete lack of empathy, extreme detachment from societal norms, and a desire for control. His behavior has been studied in criminal profiling and forensic psychology courses around the world as a rare example of a highly organized serial offender who maintained a double life, appearing calm and polite on the surface while hiding horrific actions. The role of systemic failures. One of the most troubling aspects of the case is how multiple opportunities to stop Dahmer were missed. In one instance, police returned one of his victims to him after a neighbor called 911, believing the young man was in danger. The officers believed Dahmer's explanation and left, unaware they had just handed the boy back to his killer. This failure has become a key case study in how bias, assumptions, and lack of proper training can lead to devastating outcomes. It also sparked important changes in police training and community engagement strategies. Impact on the victims' families. The families of Dahmer's victims have been outspoken about their grief and frustration, not just over the crimes, but over the way the case was handled by media, police, and the justice system. Many have since advocated for victims' rights, community awareness, and greater mental health resources to prevent similar tragedies. Their courage in speaking out has helped keep the memory of their loved ones alive and contributed to public education about violent crime and justice. Legacy and reflection. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer continues to fascinate and horrify people around the world, but more importantly, it serves as a reminder of the need for early mental health intervention, the importance of listening to community warnings and concerns, the responsibility of law enforcement to act without bias, the power of survivors and families to push for justice and reform. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes shook a city, a nation, and the world, but through understanding, education, and accountability, we can ensure that his story is not just remembered for its darkness, but for the lessons it teaches. By honoring the victims, supporting survivors, and committing to justice, we help build a world where tragedy leads to meaningful change. The real-life Hannibal, Issei Sagawa. In 1981, a crime committed in Paris by a Japanese student shocked the world. The man's name was Issei Sagawa, and his case has since become one of the most controversial and bizarre in the history of international true crime. Often referred to by the media as the real-life Hannibal, Sagawa's story is not only unsettling due to the nature of the crime, but also because of the legal outcome, which left many questioning how justice is defined across cultures and jurisdictions. This is a story not just about a crime, but about mental health, international law, and media ethics, and how one individual became both infamous and, controversially, famous. Background. Who was Issei Sagawa? Issei Sagawa was born in 1949 in Kobe, Japan, into a wealthy and educated family. He was a quiet and highly intelligent student who earned degrees in English literature and later pursued a PhD in comparative literature at the Sorbonne University in Paris. Despite his academic success, Sagawa had long struggled with disturbing thoughts, which he later admitted to in interviews. He claimed to feel deeply inadequate and isolated, and over time, these feelings became tied to extreme psychological fantasies. The crime in Paris. In June 1981, Sagawa invited a fellow student, Renée Hardevelt, to his apartment in Paris under the pretense of studying poetry and literature. Hardevelt was a 25-year-old Dutch woman, known for her intelligence and kindness. What occurred afterward resulted in her tragic death. Sagawa remained at the scene and was arrested by French authorities shortly after while attempting to dispose of evidence. He confessed to the crime in detail, and investigators quickly confirmed his involvement. Trial and legal outcome: initially charged with murder in France, Sagawa underwent extensive psychiatric evaluation, where experts diagnosed him with severe mental illness, declaring him legally unfit to stand trial. As a result, French authorities ordered him to be institutionalized indefinitely. However, the story didn't end there. In 1984, after just a few years in French custody, Sagawa was deported back to Japan. Upon arrival, Japanese authorities conducted their own evaluations. Surprisingly, Japanese doctors determined that he was mentally sound and, since the French charges had been dropped, he could not be retried under Japanese law for the same crime. This legal loophole resulted in Sagawa being released from custody, a decision that shocked the public and outraged many, especially the family of the victim. Life after release. In the years following his release, Sagawa became a controversial public figure in Japan. He gave interviews, wrote books, and even appeared in documentaries and talk shows, often discussing his crime in unsettlingly calm detail. This attention created a wave of criticism against media outlets that featured him, with many accusing them of glorifying criminal behavior and disrespecting the victim and her family. While some believed that Sagawa's openness helped raise awareness of mental health and legal system flaws, others felt he should have never been given a platform. Psychological analysis. Sagawa's case is frequently studied in psychology and criminology programs around the world. Experts note that his actions, while clearly criminal, were deeply intertwined with long-standing psychological disorders, including paraphilic disorders and antisocial tendencies. His case also highlights the challenges in assessing criminal responsibility across cultural and legal systems. What one country sees as a mental health issue, another may see as criminal intent, and the discrepancy can result in vastly different legal outcomes. Public reaction and cultural debate. The release and media exposure of Issei Sagawa sparked widespread outrage, not only in France and Japan but internationally. People questioned how someone who had admitted to such a serious crime could go free and then profit from his notoriety. The case also reignited debates about international criminal justice cooperation, ethical journalism, and media exploitation, the need for legal reforms to close jurisdictional gaps, victim dignity, and the long-term trauma inflicted on families. For many, the story of Renée Hardevelt, who was intelligent, talented, and had a promising future, became overshadowed by the infamy of the man who took her life. Advocates have since worked to shift the focus back onto the victim and her memory. Later years in death. In his final years, Sagawa lived a quiet and isolated life in Japan. He expressed regret in some interviews, but many questioned the sincerity of his words. His health deteriorated over time, and he passed away in November 2022 at the age of 73. While his death closed the final chapter of his life, the case remains an enduring reminder of the limits of legal systems, the complexities of criminal psychology, and the importance of respectful storytelling in the realm of true crime. The story of Issei Sagawa is one that continues to raise difficult but important questions. How do we handle cases where mental illness, cultural differences, and international law collide? How should the media cover crimes without causing harm? And how can we keep the memory and dignity of victims at the center of the conversation? By reflecting on this case through a responsible lens, we can honor the victim, examine the systemic gaps that allowed this outcome, and continue to push for a justice system that is fair, unified, and compassionate. The Silent Room. The Sylvia Likens case. Some stories linger not because of complexity, but because of how tragically simple the warning signs were and how devastating the consequences became when those signs were ignored. One such story is that of Sylvia Likens, a 16-year-old girl whose tragic fate in 1965 Indiana has been described as one of the worst cases of child neglect and abuse in American history. Today, the case is remembered not only for the crime itself, but for the important conversations it sparked about child welfare, community responsibility, and the need to listen to those who can't always speak up for themselves. Who was Sylvia Likens? Sylvia Likens was born in Lebanon, Indiana, in 1949. She was one of 5 children in a working-class family. In 1965, her parents, who traveled with a carnival for work, arranged for Sylvia and her younger sister, Jenny, to stay with a local woman named Gertrude Banisevsky in Indianapolis. Gertrude was a mother of 7 and was known in the neighborhood as a struggling single parent. The Likens family paid Gertrude a small weekly fee to care for the girls while they were away for work, believing this arrangement would keep their daughters safe and supervised. But what unfolded over the next several months was far from safe. Life in the Banisevsky household shortly after the arrangement began, the situation took a dark turn. Sylvia, in particular, became the target of escalating mistreatment. The reasons given varied. Some cited jealousy, others referred to false accusations and misunderstandings, but none justified what followed. What's most tragic is that several individuals, both adults and children, were present in the household or aware of the situation, and yet the abuse continued for weeks. Sylvia's sister Jenny, who had physical disabilities, was also present but felt too afraid to intervene. Many neighbors and visitors came and went during this period, but no one reported what they suspected. Whether due to fear, indifference, or uncertainty, no call for help was made until it was too late. The discovery on October 26, 1965, police were called to the Banisevsky home. By then, Sylvia had passed away under deeply tragic circumstances. The official story initially provided by the Banisevsky family was inconsistent and quickly fell apart. Jenny, encouraged by an officer's kindness, quietly told police, "You get me out of here, and I'll tell you everything." Her brave words were the beginning of justice for her sister. The trial and public outcry. The case went to trial in 1966, and it shocked the nation. Several people, including Gertrude Banisevsky, her children, and neighborhood teenagers, were implicated. Witnesses described a pattern of emotional and physical mistreatment, with multiple people participating or observing. Gertrude Banisevsky was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Others received lesser charges or juvenile sentences. Some of those involved were later released, prompting public outrage and demands for reform. The courtroom proceedings were among the most emotionally charged in the state's history. For many, the central question was simple: how did so many people stay silent for so long? A wake-up call for child welfare. The Sylvia Likens case became a turning point in how the United States approaches child protection, particularly in cases where neglect or abuse occurs outside the traditional family structure. It revealed major gaps in systems meant to monitor child welfare, especially for children temporarily placed in the care of others. Key outcomes from the case included increased support for mandatory reporting laws, requiring teachers, doctors, and other professionals to report signs of child abuse, greater emphasis on community responsibility and intervention, new educational programs to help children recognize unsafe situations and seek help. Remembering Sylvia Likens was more than a headline. She was a real teenager with dreams, siblings, and a kind heart. In the years following her death, memorials and advocacy efforts have honored her memory. In 2001, a memorial plaque and garden were established in Indianapolis, serving as a quiet but powerful tribute. Her sister Jenny, who lived with the trauma for the rest of her life, also became an advocate for child protection, sharing her story to raise awareness about the signs of abuse and the importance of speaking up. Lessons and legacy. The Sylvia Likens case reminds us that silence can be deadly, and that everyday people, not just professionals, have a responsibility to protect vulnerable children in their communities. It also teaches us about the power of one voice. Jenny Likens, though frightened and alone, found the courage to speak out. Her words helped bring justice for her sister and prevented others from suffering the same fate. The case continues to be studied in legal, psychological, and social work settings as a tragic but important example of systemic failure and how change can begin with awareness. The silent room where Sylvia Likens spent her final days is no longer just a place. It's a symbol of what can happen when abuse goes unnoticed, when victims are unheard, and when bystanders do nothing. But her story, painful as it is, also carries a message of hope, that through remembrance, education, and collective action, we can build a world where every child is seen, heard, and protected. Confronting darkness, honoring truth. True crime stories are not just tales of terror. They are reflections of society, psychology, justice, and above all, humanity. The most disturbing true crime stories has taken us through some of the darkest corners of human behavior, across different countries, cultures, and time periods. From calculated manipulation and psychological control to systemic failures and silent suffering, each chapter revealed not only the crime but the complex web of factors that allowed it to happen and the people impacted by it. This video is not about glorifying criminals or sensationalizing violence. It's about remembering victims, understanding warning signs, and examining the systems that must be improved to prevent such tragedies from happening again. Key reflections. Victims first. Behind every case is a real person whose life was lost or changed forever. Their stories deserve dignity, compassion, and remembrance. The power of awareness. Many of these crimes went undetected or unreported for too long. In nearly every chapter, there were missed opportunities to intervene. By learning the signs and speaking up, lives can be saved. Mental health matters. Several stories highlighted how untreated or mismanaged mental health conditions can escalate into danger not just for the individual, but for those around them. Mental health awareness, support, and intervention are essential. Systemic gaps need closing, whether due to outdated laws, lack of cooperation between countries, or institutional indifference. Justice was delayed or denied in many of these cases. Legal and social systems must be strengthened to ensure better protection and accountability. Survivor strength. Some of the most powerful stories in this book are not about the crimes but about the survivors. Their courage to endure, escape, and speak out gives us hope and teaches us resilience in the face of darkness. Why these stories matter. It can be uncomfortable to read about crimes so disturbing and tragic, but facing these realities is the first step toward creating meaningful change. These stories serve as a mirror reflecting not just the actions of a few individuals, but the responsibilities of entire communities, institutions, and cultures. By learning from the past, we better equip ourselves for the future. By honoring those who suffered, we affirm the value of every human life. Moving forward, true crime, when told responsibly, should never be easy to absorb. These are not fictional nightmares, they're real events with real consequences. Let this knowledge fuel awareness. Let it inspire kindness, courage, and vigilance. Let it be a reminder that each of us, in our own way, plays a role in protecting others, whether as neighbors, educators, professionals, or simply compassionate human beings. Thank you for taking this journey, one that doesn't just explore darkness, but helps bring light to the stories that must never be forgotten. If this video moved you, informed you, or made you think deeper about the world around you, don't let the conversation end here. Share this story. Speak up for those who no longer can. Leave a comment or review. Your voice helps raise awareness and keep these stories alive. Woo. Follow for more true crime stories told with compassion, accuracy, and purpose. Have a case you think more people should know about. Reach out. We're building a community of truth seekers and advocates. Together, we don't just tell stories, we honor lives, demand justice, and stand for change. Subscribe, share, and stay informed, because awareness saves lives.